So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. As I said just a minute ago, I'm so excited to introduce Matina. She is absolutely amazing to work with. She serves as the project director for Kids Voting Ohio, a nonpartisan voting and civic educational program for Ohio schools. Prior to Kids Voting Ohio, Matina served as program coordinator for Real Choice Ohio on a special project in support of Ohio schools. Matina has a political science degree from Ohio State University and regularly serves in advocacy and coordinating roles for political candidates and issues throughout Ohio. Matina is going to take us through some resources that are available to you to use with your students or your friends on how the redistricting process could possibly work and what tools would be available if you wanted to try to create your own maps. Matina?
Thanks, Pam. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Power of the Lines, the redistricting process. So today we're going to be discussing for the first half kind of what exactly is going on in the redistricting process in Ohio, and then we'll dive into those educational resources that can be utilized in classrooms and with your students. So we'll start with an overview of Ohio's redistricting process and what exactly is happening now. This first half of the presentation could also be utilized in your classrooms to talk to students about the redistricting process specific to Ohio. All right, so the redistricting process is used by governments to redraw political boundaries. This is going to apply to all levels of government where district elections are held. So the U.S. House of Representatives, the state legislatures, city councils, school boards, county boards, judicial elections, and even things like water districts. The entire redistricting process is based off the idea of one person, one vote, which makes sure that every voice can be represented fairly by creating districts that have the same number of people. This relies off the census data. Census data is collected every 10 years and is used to draw these new maps to account for the ways that populations have changed in the state and across districts. The redistricting process is happening right now, and it is happening very fast. In fact, tomorrow is an important day as it's the deadline for the state, for the Redistricting Commission to adopt state legislative districts, so maps for the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate. This process is extremely important. It's going to influence who runs for office, who's elected, and it also has very long-term effects as these maps are typically going to be in place for a 10-year period. So the redistricting process starts with census data. Again, the census data is just essential to this process as it's going to provide all the information that's necessary about the population. So once the census data is released, in this case, it would be the census data from 2020, the process can begin. If you've noticed this year, the process has been quite hectic. Typically, the census data is made available to the states by April 1st, but we didn't receive it until about August, and many states are still waiting on receiving some of their census data. The next step in the redistricting process is going to be the public hearings. Public hearings are held and scheduled by the parties responsible for the redistricting process. They are constitutionally required in the Ohio Constitution. We've had many public hearings so far this year. There were 10 at the end of August. Those weren't actually required, but they were additional hearings, but those were all prior to having any maps introduced for the state legislatures. And we're currently finishing up the final public hearing for the state legislature maps. It's started at 10 a.m. this morning, and it's still ongoing at the Ohio State House today. The next step, which kind of happens in correspondence with these public hearings, is the drafting of maps. And this is where we are now. So the Redistricting Commission and the state legislatures are both drafting these maps. The Redistricting Commission has adopted maps for the state legislatures, so the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate, and then tomorrow they will be sitting down to approve these plans. The map approval process is different for the congressional map, and then the state legislator maps, but we will talk about that a bit more in the next slide. And then that last step of the redistricting process is having new maps in place for the next general election. So if everything goes as scheduled, we should have new maps for both our congressional districts and our state legislative districts by the end of November, and they will first be used in the 2022 elections. On the bottom half of the screen, there's just kind of an overlay of like how many districts and how many seats we have in our state legislature. So there's 99 House seats, and we have 33 Senate seats, and then 15 congressional seats. We did previously have 16 seats. We lost one to reapportionment from that 2020 census data, as population growth was a bit more in other states in comparison to Ohio. So who's responsible for redistricting? So I'll start first with congressional redistricting. How it's laid out in Ohio's Constitution is it is a multi-step process. So it first goes to the Ohio legislature. They have the opportunity to create congressional district lines until September 30th. With that, they have to get a 3/5 supermajority. So that's going to include votes of half of each major party in each chamber to adopt and approve those maps. If they're unable to do that, it's going to fall to a backup commission, a 7-member political commission, which is made up of the Ohio governor, the Secretary of State, the state auditor, and then 2 state legislators from each party, which is also going to include the Senate president and the Speaker of the House. The Redistricting Commission is on the screen here, and you can see all the members that are a part of that commission. So there's only 2 Democrats, as the 3 state office holders, the governor, Secretary of State, and auditor are all Republicans. So in order for them to pass a map, they have to have bipartisan support. So 2 members of each party have to support the map. So in that case, both Democrats will have to support the map. If one or both of them does not, then it goes back to the state legislature, and they can pass a plan with a simple majority. In that case, it is a regular statute, so it's subject to gubernatorial veto. So if it goes all the way through the process and they only pass it on party lines, then those maps will only be in place for 4 years or 2 general election cycles. But if throughout any part of this process, they are able to get bipartisan support, we will have a map in place for 10 years. The state legislative redistricting is solely held responsible by Ohio's Redistricting Commission, which is scheduled to approve a map tomorrow. And again, they will need that bipartisan support. So 2 members of both parties will have to approve the map in order for it to be in place for 10 years. And if they don't, then the maps will be in place for 4 years or 2 general election cycles. We're now going to transition into those classroom resources. So these are the resources that we offer on redistricting and map making. These are designed for 4th through 12th grade classrooms. I will say a majority of the resources on here are going to be more fit for those middle and high school levels, but we do include some activities that will work in the elementary classrooms as well. All of these resources are completely accessible online and can be found on the WOSU Classroom website. And we'll go there and visit that as well in just a moment. This redistricting and map making course is going to have 4 online components. We will go through each one of them in a little bit more detail as well. So we have the redistricting FAQs and available resources. And then we have lessons, educational resources, and standard alignment. Communities are the building blocks of district maps. And then finally, links to mapping software. So here is what the course is going to look like. The Redistricting and Map Making course brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Ohio. And then we'll get to the first component on here, which is redistricting FAQs and available resources. So this page is really going to serve as a resource page where you can find all the information about the redistricting process, apportionment, and partisan gerrymandering. There's a plethora of different resources on here. So we have a lot of documents as well as videos. These resources could serve as background information before you dive into a redistricting lesson plan or activity. And it also is going to provide specific information about Ohio in accordance with the Ohio Constitution. This could be used to like create a PowerPoint for your students about the redistricting process. Students can come here on their own to learn about the redistricting process. It can be utilized in a variety of different ways. And it also just serves, again, like as an FAQ. So if there's something that students are asking about or you're unaware of, you can find pretty much everything about Ohio's redistricting process here. Next, we'll talk about the lesson plans. So we provide on here 3 lesson plans. Specifically, most of these lesson plans are going to be designed for those middle school and high school grade levels. So we have 2 from iCivics, which are not going to be focused specifically on Ohio, as they are made to be used nationwide. But this first one here, Redistricting and Gerrymandering, which is a project of KQED, was designed for the Cleveland metropolitan area. So it is a little bit more specific to Ohio, and anything in there that refers to Cleveland, it can be used really for the entire state. These lesson plans can be taught between 1 and 2 class periods, depending on if you want to include any of those extension activities. And they're going to cover in depth the redistricting process and gerrymandering as well. We also have on here a couple student games. So there's 2 variations of this. So gerrymander is going to be something that's better for those younger students, ideally like the 3rd through the 8th grade level students. And it's just a simple game to learn about what gerrymandering is and a little bit about how redistricting works, but it's not going to get into any of the complexities of this process, where the redistricting game is a little bit more complex. It gives all the student players like a position where they are kind of in charge of this redistricting process. And it's a really fun, interactive way for them to learn about it. This would honestly be a wonderful activity to assign as like a homework assignment, or if your classroom is virtual, this is something great to do with them as well. We have some other resources on here as well. There's a video from TEDA that talks a bit about gerrymandering. I think it's like 3 to 5 minutes. It's a pretty short video. It's a great introduction, a little bit about Dave's redistricting app, but we'll talk about that more on our map making page. And then the Atlas of Redistricting, which is going to show a bunch of variations of what Ohio congressional district maps could look like if certain interests were what was focused on to create the maps. And it's like a cool resource that students can use when looking at the maps that are currently in place and all the different map options that could be in place. And on the bottom of this page here, we went ahead and we took all the social studies standards where redistricting fits. So if you're interested in finding like where you can fit redistricting curriculum into your classroom or your grade level, specifically to social studies, that will all be available on this page as well. Now we'll talk about communities are the building blocks of district maps. So this is information specifically on why communities are so necessary to the redistricting process. Maps preserving community interests made by community members. So this is a really large part of the public hearing process. Community members are able to submit maps directly to the Redistricting Commission, attend hearings, and testify in support of different community maps or their own community maps, and talk about why their community interests are so essential to redistricting into Ohio. This is kind of just going to run through all the different aspects of these community maps and the importance of community interests within redistricting. I will note that this page, the information on this page or similar resources should be referenced if your students are going to be participating in map making. They would also be able to view maps made by community members on the Redistricting Commission's website. Some concepts and ideas I wanted to share in terms of community mapping and like some assignments that you could do with your students. You could have students compare community maps submitted to the commission to the party produced maps and then create an argument for which maps they think are best. You could have students watch a past public hearing and then draft their own testimony and maybe hold like a public hearing in your classroom. And then you can have, or you could have students choose a community issue and create a map preserving those community interests. And then students would be able to compare their maps with one another and then learn firsthand about like how complicated yet essential this process is. So any information about community map making and all of that, you can look here and find information or send your students this way if they are going to be participating in any map making. The last component we have to this course is links to the mapping software and their user guides. So we recommend using either Dave's Redistricting app or Districtor. They're both very easy to use, and this page will kind of provide information on the software as a whole, links to the software, as well as like their guides. There's some videos and stuff on here, as well as like how to share and publish maps made with these two different software programs. So I want to dive a little bit more into utilizing these map making tools. So these tools are going to allow students to draw state legislative and congressional district lines. And again, both these online resources are super easy to use. They provide very clear instructions, and they have a lot of different features and functions depending on like what complexity level you would like to go with your students in this map making process. Having students create their own maps is an excellent interactive opportunity. They can enter them into competitions. They could submit them directly to the Redistricting Commission. They can compare their maps to the official maps that are adopted by the state. And they can even use these, they could use them as like an extra credit assignment or group activities where students can compare their maps among their peers or with other community maps that have been submitted to the commission. These tools are going to be best suited for that high school level. And then we also would recommend that before having your students create maps or engage in this process, it is necessary that they learn the rules and required redistricting criteria in accordance to the Ohio Constitution. And lastly, in terms of the redistricting and map making curriculum, when is it best to discuss redistricting with your students? We want to stress that redistricting this process is so important, and talking to your students about this is so important as it affects each and every one of us and will continue to do so after these maps are adopted. It's really important that students not only learn about how this process works, but also how it impacts them and how they can participate in the process at any stage. The time to talk to your students about redistricting is now as the process is happening. Constitution Day is actually this Friday, September 17th. This would be an excellent opportunity to bring redistricting discussion and activities into your classrooms. Redistricting can be introduced at any time with your students, but it's going to be the most impactful during this official process, which at the latest is scheduled to conclude by the end of November. On here, we have a link to a timeline for the redistricting process. So if, say, Constitution Day this Friday or like next week is not really going to fit into your class schedule, you can look at the timeline and find a place where it would fit best for you. That is everything that we have in terms of redistricting and map making, but we did want to share a couple other civic classroom resources that can be utilized as well. So the League of Women Voters has an online course called Voting in Civics, Know Your Ohio Government. This is on the same platform that the redistricting and map making curriculum is on, so WOSU Classroom. This is an online learning curriculum designed to civically engage students of all ages and to drive young voter turnout across Ohio. Students can actively participate as a citizen while simultaneously increasing their knowledge of how government and elections work. There's a bunch of different exercises throughout the course, including registering to vote, writing to a politician, conducting mock elections, voting, and learning about the various roles and structures of government. We'd also recommend Kids Voting Ohio, which is a civic and voter education program for Ohio schools that's designed specifically for grade levels 3 all the way through 12. Kids Voting Ohio is going to offer free social studies curriculum completely aligned with Ohio's social studies standards, election season activities, mock elections for all grade levels and all elections, and a lot of other resources like student scholarships, as well as like assistance with field trips and a video library featuring videos from Ohio's elected leaders, serving as a fun way for students to learn about Ohio's government. And then here we just, after of everything we've talked about, just kind of a list of the resources and those links to all these various resources, the online curriculum and Know Your Ohio Government, Kids Voting, and then also that redistricting timeline. That is everything we have, but I did want to take a minute for any questions if anyone may have some.
If participants would like to unmute themselves and ask questions, you could do so at this time, or place your questions in the chat. Matina, thank you for taking us through that. It was really very informative. And Michael, thank you for making sure we have all the links to all of the parts and pieces. We will all be looking forward to using these materials and learning more about the entire districting process as we go through the next couple of months. Any last words, Matina? I don't see any questions, Michael, unless you do. And I noticed that Michael has put both my and Matina's emails in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to either one of us if you have questions, if you need help with the materials or need additional contact or other resources potentially. Last words, Matina.
That's really everything I have, but thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to be here with us. And we really hope that you're able to incorporate some of this curriculum into your classrooms and have your students participate and learn about this historic process.